fully support participated in all this meeting from the beginning, Chair. I think that is the reason behind that, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Advocate, for that clarity. Apart from commenting, I think they'll just fully participate, as I engaged them yesterday, and they'll actively participate even in the public hearings, because they are more knowledgeable on these issues than us. And thank you, they've accepted it. I don't know whether the member, I see the hand of the member, Matseke.
Yeah, no, good morning. Yeah, no, good morning, Chair, and good morning, members, and thanks, Chair, for welcoming us to the OCPOL committee as new members. I thought it's important that I must raise my hand so that officially I must indicate this, even though I could have had a telephonic conversation with you. But I think it's important that this should be also on record. Having listened to Advocate Gauteng presenting on the rationale as to why this particular bill was necessarily referred to OCPOL, I must indicate, Chairperson, that I still have reservations as a portfolio committee chairperson of economic development, much as I'm a full member of this particular committee. Because if you look at the proposed Gauteng Provincial Laws General Amendment Bill, 95% of what is proposed on this bill that was, according to me, by the way, introduced in 2020, affects economic development. And I still want to be convinced as to really the rationale as to why this bill, or even to an extent, if they are here as state law advisors, how did they see it proper that this amendment should be introduced by the Office of the Premier, not necessarily responsible members of those particular agencies that are going to be affected because of the jurisdiction of those agencies, like you've correctly put it, and like our Advocate will have correctly put it. They reside within economic development and transport. But like I've indicated, 95% is only one agency from transport that is affected. But all other amendments, they affect agencies within the economic development. Hence, I thought that it's important that I should raise this issue, though you could have explained as to the rationale, but I'm still not convinced. And I have this feeling that it's as if we are rushing this amendment bill without necessarily applying our mind into it. But I will also engage further when the Premier Office presents. But I needed to just give this clarification.
Thank you, Mr. I think let's wait for let's wait for the Premier's office to present, and they'll also present their own rationale, because when we were engaged as OCPOL, as I told you yesterday in our telephone conversation, that we asked for a rationale to why is it here, and we were told it is because it's piloted by the Office of the Premier, hence it came to OCPOL. And secondly, that is why for me it was important that you guys are invited and I engage you, so that we've got the same approach. So let's not engage before the Premier's presentation. I would appeal for that, so that when they present, they then will be able to engage and we'll take it from them. That is OCPOL, we had our own concerns and whatever, but I would appeal. Member Malema, I see your hand.
Oh, thank you, Honorable Chair, once again. I don't know, maybe I will have to subject myself to your wisdom in terms of the proposal that you're putting from the Chair, because I wanted to check with the Advocate there that why a joint meeting instead of a joint meetings of committees, because I think Rule 155 of the standing rules will dictate that where there is a matter of mutual interest between or amongst committees, then they can have a joint meetings of committees. But maybe I should reserve that until such time that it would have been dealt with in accordance with your proposal. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that, Malema. Advocate, I think we've just noted that we will engage after the meeting, after the Premier's officers. I'm not sure whether the Premier is here, but I saw. Can we now move to the Premier's presentation on the General Amendment laws? I see the presentation being flighted, but I don't hear any voice.
Good morning, Chair. We're trying to get Premier because we thought, Chair, through you, Premier would speak first, unless you wanted the Premier to speak at the end, just before we get the actual presentation, Chair. Let me just check.
It will be good to hear the Premier's voice first.
Premier. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Chair.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't want to interfere with processes. I'm a new one, so I'm a new one. When you are a new one in an environment, you behave. You don't start by talking. But thanks for the opportunity, Chair, Rodlamini and members of the committee. I truly appreciate the invite and we'll ask the acting DG to take us through the presentation. And if there are areas that need our immediate attention, we'll collectively respond. But thank you so much for your kindness and the messages of support that we've received from all of you, especially members of this committee. It humbles us, but it's just a shared vision to work together and ensure that we take Gauteng forward. But thanks for the opportunity. I'll ask the DG to make a presentation, if you don't mind, Chair.
Acting DG.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks, Premier. Premier, we have asked the team from the State Law Advisory Services to lead us on this presentation. We're also taking heed on the discussion that has happened earlier on, and we will be able to take the issues going forward. I've asked the Advocate Munwabisi to speak to the presentation. I don't know if he's in the meeting. I think he should be.
Thank you, Acting DG, and thanks to the Premier, members of the Provincial Legislature, members of the committee, as well as the staff of the Provincial Legislature. As indicated by the Acting DG, my name is Munwabisi Ngutu, and I'm part and parcel of State Law Advisory Services, the director responsible for legislative drafting, the Office of the Premier. The way I'm going to go about the presentation, I'm going to give the content. For instance, we're going to deal first with the purpose of the bill, what the bill intends to achieve, what it seeks to achieve, and then deal with the legislative and as well as the policy framework. Then the enabling legislation that is seeks to amend. Of course, I will delve into the context of the bill, then show the metrics of the proposed amendment per subject, the consultation process that was involved, and then go to conclusion. Let's move the presentation. Of course, the purpose of the bill. As we know currently, the appointment of members of boards and the hiring of chief executive or executives of public provincial public entities are spread across to enabling acts of these. Some, of course, as what's indicated before, falls under DED. Others, of course, fall under transport, and others, of course, under other departments. So this was to rationalize the appointment of board members and, of course, the hiring of chief executive officers of these entities, in order to have in the province a uniform process and then procedures into these appointments, not spread over, because others, for instance, the executive council as a collective plays a role, in others only the responsible MEC is responsible for the appointment. So the intention is to bring a uniform regime into the appointment. And of course, doing that, of course, was then the ultimate aim is to that the appointments must be, before they are made, must be considered, of course, and be approved by the executive council as a collective in that regard. And in doing so, of course, it is meant to achieve enhanced standard of governance and accountability, of course, within these public entities, with, of course, the executive council playing a collective responsibility, for instance, in the appointment of the members, determination of membership, appointment of chief executive officers, as well as the determination of their appointment. Let's move, Sharon. Of course, also to improve financial planning and accountability, due to the enhanced role of the MEC for finance, for instance, in determining the remuneration, so that there's a standard approach across the remuneration and allowance, for instance, payable to the members of governing bodies, the determination, for instance, of terms and conditions of employment of staff of these entities, as well as, for instance, executive as OCPOL. The mantra is the executive taking collective responsibility, especially with the appointment. We know sometimes these public entities become dysfunctional at some point, and all of this, and then the administrator has to be appointed in to take the activities or the functions and powers of these public entities. Then when that appointment is done, so it is not done by the responsible member single-handedly, then the executive take responsibility for who is appointed as such as an administrator. So in regard, let's move, sharing. And now I move to the purpose of the bill, which to the legislative and policy framework, which I hope members, if they indulge me, will contribute to answering some of the questions that has been or statements that have been made before, so that we get a clear picture. First and foremost, for instance, that's the starting point. We know for the fact that, of course, it's the Constitution, because Section 2 of the Constitution decrees that it is the supreme law of the Republic, and any law, for instance, for that matter, or conduct for that matter, is subject to that Constitution, or if it's inconsistent with that Constitution, so then it is invalid, and then all the obligations that are imposed by the Constitution, they must be, of course, adhered to and fulfilled. So we know, for instance, that the executive, the premier, or the executive authority of the province, in terms of Section 25(1) of the Constitution, vests solely on the premier of the province. So in other words, the premier is the repository of the executive authority of the province, all that subsection 2 deals with is the sharing, is the sharing of the exercise of that authority, but it doesn't divest from the fact that the Premier is the repository of that executive. So he shares the exercise of that authority with other members of the executive authority, whom of course he appoints and assigns functions and powers in terms of Section 132 of the Constitution. So one of those functions in terms of the go back, I am not finishing that slide. One of that executive authority of the powers contained there, for instance, is coordinating the functions, subsection coordinating the function of the provincial administration and its department. And that, of course, include as well as public entities. So together they do that because that section says the Premier exercise together, with other members. So as a collective, in other words, they coordinate the function. And then if we go, for instance, to section 133.2 of the Constitution, it provides succinctly that members, of course, are accountable collectively and individually to the legislature for the exercise of powers and performance of their function. So this phrase, collective and individual accountability, one would try to explain and say, for instance, there are those functions that the Constitution originally confers to an individual member, for instance, as individually responsible for those functions. If, for instance, we go at the national level, we'll see in the Constitution that the Constitution delegates certain functions directly to a cabinet member responsible for policing, for instance, cabinet member responsible for administration of justice, cabinet member, for instance, the president is required to appoint one cabinet member to take charge or responsibility for intelligence services of the country. So in those provisions of the Constitution, despite the collective responsibility of cabinet or executive, that member is individually as well accountable for the performance and function of those. So a typical example, for instance, if we can take, was the matter between the Minister of Finance and the unions regarding the public service agreement, that the last leg was not implemented. The Constitutional Court said one of the arguments that were advanced by the unions was that the Minister of Finance was part of the cabinet that agreed on that 3-year term salary agreement. And then he cannot go out then and say he never agreed on that and all of that. Of course, the Constitutional Court disagreed and said in that judgment that although he was part of the meeting that took that decision, a cabinet meeting, he was independently, the Constitution assigned to him independently to determine. And if you read with the two regulations that were cited, 78 and 79, was that he was independently supposed to make a decision regarding that salary agreement, and he didn't make that decision. So then, because he had never independently made that kind of a decision, then that salary agreement as a whole was declared to be invalid and was unlawful. Hence, the Minister of Finance prevailed. So that is the individual accountability, because the Constitution originally assigns to that minister the responsibility, not collective responsibility. The same in the province. There are those provisions that assign typically as a member of executive for finance. He is independently accountable for financial matters within the province and all of those things. So that is why then this thing of collective and individual responsible. So all these appointments now, because the members of the executive coordinate the functions of the public of the provincial administration and department. So they are collectively responsible. So they must take collective responsibility, in other words, in the appointment of board members and all of that. And then the responsible member, of course, it deals with, for instance, it deals with the issue once it of the executive, then it take issue of appointments, letters, and setting up the terms and conditions and all those things. But the ultimate decision rests, of course, with the council. And it just implemented that decision. The single member will implement that decisions. As well as the other issues, the Companies Act, which came into effect, the new Companies Act, which came into effect after some of these public entities have been established, of course, in terms of legislation. It comes with a new regime that said, for instance, the members of boards to be accountable as a collective rather than as individual members, to what we normally refer to as a joint and several responsibility or liability, or for their fiduciary duties towards the public entities and all of that. So hence the collective responsibility when we come to the public sector, the lender, because the MEC or the cabinet member is a shareholder on behalf of the state. So before he can do anything, and then he must at least defer to the collective cabinet or the council, and then all of that because of the requirements of the new Companies Act. Of course, the enabling acts and legislation, some, of course, requires the concurrency of the executive council before appointments are made. Some don't require that. The MEC can move it to appoint, and then after then, he can just inform the council about the appointments and all of that. So there was that disjunction, not a uniform way. So hence these requirements. And then, of course, is the King 4 report on corporate governance for South Africa 2016, which talk about the governing body, and it also applicable to the state-owned entities as well. Unlike the previous iterations that were not applicable to state-owned entities, this one now is applicable to state entities, and of course requires compliance, unlike others that it was just on the choice of state entities whether to follow or not. But this one, they have to comply with it, and not on why they didn't comply and all of these things. And then there was, of course, the guidelines that then were developed and approved by cabinet at the national level during March 2019 regarding the appointment of persons to boards and CEO of state-owned, state-controlled entity and state-owned institutions and all of that. And that was made to be also, it was recommended that this should also be applicable at the provincial as well as a local sphere of government. And of course, the Executive Council in its meeting of the 14th of March 2018 resolved or adopted that those national guidelines for the appointments of persons to board and CEO of cities, and gave the instructions that then, as a temporary measure, now we should look at all provincial legislation or enabling legislation and ensure that where amendments are necessary, those amendments are made in order to make all of that comply with the guidelines, as well, of course, the King 4, and of course the guidelines and the King 4 and the Companies Act, as well as the Constitution, making sure that the appointments, of course, are made by the collective rather than a responsible member for that public entity. So all of this is taking into account all of those, hence these amendments. So this is the temporary measure, because while we are looking, we know members at the national level, there was that panel that was looking at a review of all public entities in the government and all of that. And that panel produced a report, the report that was looked at cabinet, and it requires a legislation to come into place and all of that. But unfortunately, as we speak, there hasn't been a movement towards that to come with legislation at the national level. Of course, that will guide provinces as how to move. Here in the province, the executive will take a decision for as a temporary measure in the meantime, just to close certain gaps and to make uniform in this only in as far as the appointment and the termination of board members, as well as the COs and the CEOs. At the provincial level, while we're meeting that, and because we see that the national is moving at a tortoise pace, we have at the provincial level, the GTEC, which is the government which is the entity of the National Treasury, is taking a study of all the provincial entities, and as well as after that it will produce a report which will then come with a permanent solution as to how the governance of the provincial public entities can then be regulated or be governed and all of that. So there's those processes that are taken, but we try at the moment as a stopgap measure to fill the gaps and to make the appointments as uniform as possible across the province, while we wait for the national framework and all of that. Of course, the study that is being done at the provincial level. We may move now. We may move to the next place. Having said that, we may now move to the second one. Of course, these are the pieces of legislations that are seek to be amended. The Gauteng Gambling Act of 1995, the Consumer Affairs and Unfair Protection and all of that. The Gambling Act is a board in terms of that one. The Consumer Affairs, of course, there's a Consumer Court, as well as other entities that are establishing, which, of course, in the Tourism Act 10 of 2001, there's a board there as well. The Gauteng Growth and Development Agency 5 of 2003 as well, there's a board there. Enterprise Profiler Act 5 of 2005, there's a board there, which is a governing, all of them are governing bodies, of course. There's a Gauteng Management Act board, there's a governing body. There is a Gauteng Liquor Act 3 of 2014. Also, there is a board as a governing board. So it intends to bring a uniform regime in terms of appointment of the governing bodies of both of all these provincial entities, and come with a uniform way of appointing members of boards as well as CEO, where the principal decision maker is the Executive Council, and then there's the members, the responsible members, or MEC responsible for these entities. Of course, they only execute the decisions that has already been taken by the Executive Council as a collective. Let's move. Let's move. And of course, if we move now to the content of the bill, you see this is already that I have spoken about. I use green, which is the road that we are taking, the way forward. As you know, when the robots turn green, is indicate that we can move. And of course, the red, of course, we replace executive wherever in the bill the appointment must be done by the responsible member, or some legislation are saying MEC, and others are saying a responsible member in concurrency with the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs, while the two were falling under the same MEC and all of that. So we are removing that, and we're trying to replace that, all of that, with the Executive Council. And we are removing, for instance, the concurrency with the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs, because we feel that the legislature can't play two roles at the same time. The provincial legislature is supposed to exercise oversight, of course, over the Executive Council. It can't have its legs on both sides in order to fulfill that. And then, of course, we're saying in consultation, not after consultation with the member, in terms of determining, of course, the remuneration and allowances. We make it that the concurrence of the MEC for Finance must be obtained, not just to consult, and whether he or she agrees or doesn't, then the responsible member moves on. So we require that his concurrency must be obtained, and all of that. So that is why we're removing, we're substituting with in consultation. Let's move that, so that we can appreciate the role that he plays. The same year, of course, in the appointment of the CEO and all of that, or the administrator, his decision is required. And of course, there's also the concurrence of the Standing Committee on Finance and some legislation. We are removing that and replacing that, of course, with the concurrence of the responsible member. All of that. Let's move, Sharon. Let's move, Lento. Similarly, here is the same across. This is a common thread in all this legislation, substituting the responsible member or the MEC, of course, with the Executive Council, so that we emphasize that collective responsibility or decision making of council with regard to appointment these members of board or chief executive officers. Let's move, sharing. Of course, this is the proposed framework. It goes to what I've already said. Now it's just that it delves into an act showing where these amendments are being sought in terms of these acts. For instance, Section 5, Section 14, and all those things. It talks to what I've already spoken about, especially in this one, replacing the responsible member MEC with, of course, with the council, all of that. Let's move quickly, sharing, because this is already matters that I've spoken, and these are nature of environment, the termination of membership, for instance, the nature of amendment, and the enabling legislation, what happens in all these pieces of legislation, as you can see, clubbed together, dealing with the subject matter that we try to fix in terms of all these pieces of legislation in the third column to my right. Let's move, Sharon. Similarly, suspension of membership of any member of the governing board, determination of remuneration and allowances payable to members. Talks about the nature of the amendment, what we're trying to achieve. We're omitting the standing committee in the suspension, because, with suspending a member, we must have consultation with the standing committee, all of those things. But that is the responsibility in terms of the Constitution and Act of the executive member of the Executive Council and all those things. So we're trying to correct any anomaly that were done when this legislation were conceived in 1995, when we're still fresh from the old dispensation to the new dispensation, not necessarily completely au fait with how the separation of powers mechanism works between the legislature and, of course, the executive in that regard. So hence, we deferred to standing committee to the legislature, when in fact that was not, it was a normality to do so based on the separation of powers principle or doctrine. That is all. Let's move, Sherin. Of course, this is the same, the terms and conditions, including remuneration payable and all of that. We are dealing with the same thing. Of course, in consultation, as I've told, not after consultation, which the decision of the MSA for Finance is not required, but we make sure that the decision of the MSA, because he controls the purse or she controls the purse, then he needs to agree on whatever these people are paid and all of that. Let's move, Sharon. The administrator, the same thing. Let's move, Sharon. The making of regulation, for instance, we know we've got that, the Scrutiny Act and all of that. We correct that as well. As of course, the appointment of chief executive, suspension and the termination of them, the common thread applying across all of that. Collective decision-making of the Executive Council. The sections that are intended to be amended by this proposed bill. Let's move, Sharon. The consultation process now, if we move to the consultation process, immediately after the decision was taken to draft this type of legislation, the consultation was, the draft legislation was done the way in line with the decision of EXCO, and then that draft legislation, of course, was sent to all the departments and public entities that are affected in terms of this act. It was sent for them to comment, and all of those, and some of them did. Most of them, of course, it's an executive decision. They felt that okay, it's in line with their decision-making powers, and then the amendments are, of course, okay in terms of the legislative framework and policy framework. They felt that they agree with the amendments that have been proposed and all of that. Once that consultation process was done, of course, we submitted the bill together with the memorandum to the executive, of course, together with the draft bill. And then once that was done, of course, the consultation with the Minister of Finance at the national level was done. Of course, he agreed with the amendments, as we know that in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, he plays a certain role. And then once that was done, and then the bill was published in the Gazette for comments and all of that. And then we received some comments, few of them, one or two, but not substantial or any measure. And then once that, the bill was preliminarily certified by state law advisors. And by that time already, the province has adopted the socio-economic impact assessment framework. And then it followed that. And of course, we got a certificate, a final certificate, which gave a nod to the bill. And then, of course, once that was done, ESCO's approval now, it was sought. And then the bill was published in the Gazette. And once was done, of course, the member of the leader of government business introduced the bill into the legislature. The leader of government business then was the current premier, as we know. Then he introduced the bill legislature. And from there, as we know that the matter now is under the realm of the provincial legislature, which we are now called upon to do this presentation, all of that. And then we moved on, Sharon. Of course, as I've said, in terms of the conclusion, all of that is meant is to enhance the standard of governance and accountability. Of course, as I've mentioned, with the Executive Council taking collective responsibility for the appointment and determination of members of governing bodies, as well as chief executive officers of the provincial public entities. Let's move, Sharon. Let's move to the last slide. To the last slide, of course, I would like to conclude by this quote from the 18th century by one of the philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, when he wrote in the Social Contract that the legislative power is the heart of the state, the executive is the brain which set all parts in motion. The brain may be paralyzed and the individual is still alive, but as soon as the heart stops functioning, the creature is dead. As I've said, for instance, the processes to come with the governance of all public entities at the national level seems to have stalled, and all of that. And in other words, if one may use the euphemistically, this thing, the brain at the national level seems to have been paralyzed, but be that as may, the heart is still working. It's not dead, and the power or this force is at now it is at the level of the provincial legislature to take the necessary course, and of course agreed to the bill that has been, of course, prepared and initiated by the executive in this regard. And on that, members, I would like to thank you. That is the presentation on the bill, the State Law Advisory. I'm doing this on behalf of Mr. Advocate K, to the Chief Director on State Law Advisories. And I've said, my name is Monabi Sengoku, and these are our details, and we are always available for any information or question that may be directed to us. And we've already been invited to participate in the public hearings that are going to be convened in the following weeks, and I will be there representing the office of the Premier and making any thing that I'm required to table in those public days of public hearings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Advocate. Thank you for the presentation. I will open up to members for comments and questions. Yeah, can I open up to you, members? I see Member Mateke. Hand, I see there's a second hand, but I don't see whose hand is it. There are three now, but I don't see the names of the other two.
Member Msimanga, Chair.
Okay, Member
Hassan.
There are four names now. Member Mateke, Member Msimang, Member Albert, and Member Hassan, in that order. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Advocate Monabise. I'm sorry, I'm not going to try and pronounce your surname so that you accuse me of brutalizing your surname. I'm not good on pronouncing surnames, so I will stick to Advocate Monabise, and I apologize for that. Thanks for the presentation as it relates to this amendment bill. You know, I've been listening to you when you were busy going through the rationale behind the introduction of this particular general law amendment bill as it relates to the province, and you might have covered well on the powers and functions of the Premier as clearly outlined in the Constitution. Similarly, as also it clarifies the role and responsibilities of the members of the Executive Council as appointed by the Premier, obviously, based on the Chapter 20 and all sections related to the Provincial Executive Authority and its powers. But what is of most interest to me is when you made mention of this as being a temporary measure to what would have been suggested through different processes, either at the national level as to how will we then formalize the appointments of boards and hiring of CEOs, either at the national level or at the provincial level. The reason why I'm saying of most interest to me, especially when you mention the issue of this being a temporary measure, is because of whilst you were busy presenting, you somehow made mention on the legislature not being a referee and a player at the same time, especially on legislation that is currently there on different legislations. Because the difficulty of this general laws is that it seeks to amend a number of legislation that is already there, managing different entities within the provincial government. And I wanted to take you a bit back as it relates to us understanding that we are a unitary state, not a federal state. And I think you'll understand why I'm raising this, much as this unitary state is under constitutional democracy, is that whatever that happens at the national level, as outlined by the Constitution, must also happen at other spheres of government. Because you made mention of this standing, because in the act, because some of these acts they go as far as back as 1995, before the changes, so there are now portfolio committees, not necessarily standing committees, and I understand where you are coming from. But as a matter of reference, is that at the national level, I think most of us, you are aware that what you are raising is not necessarily the case. And pointing the reference, I'll make a case studies of the two portfolio committees, one being communication and one being portfolio committee on women and youth, where they go through a process of recommending appointment of boards within their own jurisdiction. One being the SABC. I think those that are within the legal fraternity will know what could have transpired previously with the Minister of Communication. Equally, the Gender Equality Commission as well. If we can just make a reference to those two, not necessarily going through the higher portfolio committees. There are other case studies that I can make a reference to. But I somehow understand where you are coming from, mentioning the issues of the guidelines, the Companies Act, and the King 4, and all this other legislation that then necessitated that we have this proposal. But also what is of worrying to me, Advocate Monabisi and Advocate, is it Gert, if I spell you correctly, is that when this bill was introduced to the legislature in terms of Rule 192, subsection 1 of the standing rules of the GPL, it indicates that this bill is introduced to rationalize the appointment or reappointment of boards and the hiring of CEOs of provincial public entities. But you see, where I tend to have a bit of a problem now, because this is on what is published, is what the bill that is published and the bill that is introduced in the legislature. Now, in the same bill, it then gives all these other acts or agencies where it focuses on, but key is that it meant to formalize, to rationalize the appointment and reappointment of boards and the hiring of CEOs. But somehow there are exclusions, Advocate Monobis. And I want to understand why there is this exclusions. Pointing the reference, the following agencies are excluded. One, the Gauteng Infrastructure Finance Agency, under finance, is excluded there. Yes, the argument might be there is no board, but the legislation that is included, it clearly indicates and highlights that the hiring of CEOs of provincial public entities, and this one is one of the provincial agencies. The second one, the Gauteng Film Commission. Now there is different because there's a board, there is also a CEO. So it's also excluded. As to why, maybe we'll be able to respond why that particular exclusion. Then there is the Gauteng Partnership Fund under Human Settlement. Also, it's excluded on this provincial, the Gauteng Provincial Laws General Amendment Bill. Maybe if you can give us an explanation as to why you will have excluded these other agencies within these particular departments, but focusing only on these particular ones. And I would have thought that having you listened to our earlier conversation where the chair will have guided us on how to move forward, that maybe we allow you to then present, then we can be able to engage you. I still thought you'll be able to then indicate as to the rationale behind why the Office of the Premier will have, through you as state law advisors, by the way, I presume, will have advised that this needs to be introduced from that particular level. If maybe I missed it, maybe we'll also explain it as you respond to those issues. But I'm of the view that there are quite a number of issues that we still need to, much as it's a very good temporary measure that we are introducing, which is not of a problem in the manner in which you've presented it, but I still maintain that there are certain issues that needs to be cleared so that we don't end up having a temporary measure that will not pass the legislative scrutiny in all its formations. So we must just be careful because within the said act, much as there are, as I conclude, Chair, I'm sorry for that. But much as I understand that there are amendments to different acts, they must not necessarily affect the entire acts that are already governing this particular agencies, so that they are not in conflict, if I may put it correctly, with the acts themselves. So I maintain that we really need to look further into this suggested temporary measure, as you could have correctly put it. Thanks, Chair. And my apologies for taking long.
Thank you, Member Msimang.
Thank you very much. I think Machek has covered a number of issues that I would have wanted to raise. So I don't blame him for taking a bit of time, because I think he's raising very much potent questions and concerns. Chairperson, I wanted to also stress the issue of how the bill is introduced and what we are told and what we are now shown, and maybe there's a bit of a mismatch that is happening there. But also to take it further, Chair, you know, one has had an opportunity to have an engage with the report that came from Judge Zondo. And one looks at some of the recommendations which the president has now started talking about, putting commissions that are going to look into that. And one of the greatest concerns, which is now being looked at, is how boards are appointed and CEOs are appointed. And therefore, the power, as the reports from the Zondo Commission is raising, is that the power cannot be vested or should not be vested in an individual or in the executive, but should somehow be looked at in terms of a panel that is being put together in order to look at this. And this is now becoming more concerning, Chairperson, that we even going as far as to then talking about a recommendation by the relevant executive, and then getting concurrence from the finance MEC in terms of remuneration. What is happening to us having some kind of a remuneration board that is independent of this the political office bearers, in order to make sure that not only do we have consistency, but we have people that are also able to be responsible, in terms of how these things are to be discharged. And for me, that remains a big challenge. So, looking at one, the powers that is vested in an individual, in an individual, let me call it that, in terms of the appointment, versus what is recommended by the commission, and actually now also coming from the presidency, that some of these things are being looked at, and yet at the same time, with what we're trying to introduce now, seems to be reinforcing what the recommendations are going against from the commission. It's something that perhaps Ubamnavisi will be able to then respond to, and also why there is that discrepancy in terms of what is being introduced and what we are now being told of here today. Chair, I will limit to that for now, I think, but most of the issues have been covered by Matsek. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Member Albert.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to discuss the concentration of appointment and various other powers in the MEC by virtue of this legislation. I think that is somewhat problematic, but it can be alleviated or can be balanced out by inserting a provision that the legislature must also decide together with the MEC on the appointment of the boards and the executive director or the leader of the board, whatever may be the case. That happens in quite a few pieces of national legislation, where the parliament must also deliberate upon who will be appointed on a certain board. And I think it will be good to take up that habit among ourselves to find a balance between the executive and the legislature going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Member Albert. Member Hassan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Couple of points. The first is that I was also looking my emails for the original copy of the bill, as in not a research analysis, not a PowerPoint presentation, but the original copy. And I'm struggling to find that. So that's the first thing. And I say that particularly because a lot of these provisions need to be read within the greater context in which they are cited. They can mean one thing pulled out of a sentence, and they can mean another thing when they are in the actual sentence of the bill. So I think that's the first thing. And I've read the other stuff that's been sent to us in detail, but I need to emphasize the fact that we need that, and we need our own session as a portfolio committee to go through that, because clause by clause analysis is really what's needed, but we really do need to understand that. And the context to which I'm also saying that is, if you hear what members are saying and what I'm about to say as well, I think we're all very cautious in giving unfettered powers to the executive for the appointment of boards and CEOs. I say this in the context of the fact that you create legislation, understanding you're not creating legislation for this year or next year. You want to create a piece of legislation that can stand the test of time. and this is now maybe my legal hat, my lawyer's hat coming on. You don't create a piece of legislation that 2 to 3 years from now is not relevant, or more importantly, creates instability. And that's the point I'm also trying to make here. We need to create a piece of legislation that creates stability in boards and creates a stability in the executive powers of certain entities that have been cited and others. We're not sure about the future of how politics are going to move in this country. What we really need to do is move towards the professionalization of the public service. And part of that is having stability. Whether there's a coalition, whether there's a majority partner, it doesn't really matter. The point is you need to create a piece of legislation that doesn't give unfettered powers to an executive alone that may or may not be unstable in the future. If we look at different municipalities and metros around the country, we don't want to be hamstrung in Gauteng to actually do the everyday work of serving our people. So that's the first reason why I'm also quite cautious in giving unfettered powers. But the second one is very much what members have said around accountability measures. And I see part of the bill is covering that, and I'll speak to that in my third point in a moment. But there's other parts of the bill that don't deal with that. There are other parts of the bill that make us all a little uncomfortable around the oversight role, but also around where does the buck stop? We'll do all of these appointments. We may or may not agree. Then there's a crisis, and it's all retrospective. We need to have some measures in these legislation clauses so that we can actually, before it becomes a crisis, deal with it, but also have that balance. And I was going to say something similar to what Member Albert said. So we need to balance a separation of powers matter. We are the legislature. We are not the implementing group, which is the executive. However, our role is to ensure the best possible implementation. And that means whether we need to create an ombud, whether we need to create different stop measures there, it needs to be in the pieces of legislation, because we don't know what the future looks like. But more importantly, and Advocate, I know you'll agree with me, we're creating a piece of legislation that must stand the test of time. My last point, Chair, is actually what I had just mentioned a moment ago. There are parts of this bill that move power away from a single individual, which is correct. We don't ever want a single person on a woman fancy to make a decision. If you look at slides 9 and 10, I'm not sure 100% the clauses, but the idea of in consultation with, there we agree, but we need to again see it in context. The approval of EXCO as a whole is fine, that's good. We can't have a lone wolf making decisions, but as usual, it's a collective better than an individual, and that collective does need to have some shape or form the inclusion of the accountability umbrella grouping, and that is us. I think we can look at other pieces of legislation to find that balance, but that is something that we need to overemphasize. And then my last point, Chair, the TEDA, that's the Township Economic Development Act. We needed to cross-reference a change in the GEP Act in terms of the Township Partnership Fund and the board, etc. And this could also be a good opportunity to do that instead of creating a whole new process where we have to go for public participation on a 2 to 3 line clause that we'll have to change in the GEP Act. So I also wanted to put that forward as a consideration, because that is a 2-3 liner that needs to be included in the GEP Act to cross-reference TEDA, just so that, I mean, the State Law Advisor did make that clear to us, and then we were going to do it soon, but of course, it's been quite a hectic process since then. So I also wanted to deposit that final point. Thank you.
Thank you, members, for your inputs. I think the Office of the Premier is taking note of the concerns and the questions and clarity-seeking questions, because I share the sentiments of members that one is a bit worried that why should it be a temporary measure? Secondly, there is also certain practices, as Member Macheke has said, that as much as I'm a federalist, you are not a federal state. There are certain practices in the National Assembly on how boards of SOEs are appointed. Why do you want to go a different route as Gauteng? But members, my attitude is that we must just look for clarity-seeking questions, have questions, but the bill is now in our hands. We can do anything we like about it. That's why we're being subjecting it to the public hearings, come back, and then have our own comments and our own whatever, and then bring a report to the House. For now, I don't think we should really engage in detail, but yes, it's good that we flag these concerns that we have as a committee. I think I must give it back to Advocate or the Premier's office for any responses from the concerns and comments and questions from members.
Thank you, Chair. Advocate Mungu.
Thank you, Acting Premier. Thank you, Acting DG. And thanks, members, for that. Start with the first questions from Member Matseke. As we said, the bill, when it was drafted, took into account
Sorry, Advocate. Can you please switch off your video, because some members are in the load shedding area, so they it creates a problem for their connectivity.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thank you very much. As mentioned, that it was a policy decision of Council that while these processes are unfolding at the national level, to come with a uniform measure as that will apply across state. That are underpinned, of course, by the reports that have been introduced by panels and all of that. The executive felt that it can't wait for that process, not knowing when that process, at the end of the day, is going to produce what result. What we say in Kosuba is awuzala nkomo nini na, nkomo nini na, but is our where that process is going to end. There were certain urgent matters that the executive felt it needs to address now, as indicated, for instance, by Member Hassan, that the collective appointment, fact that the council will take a collective decision when these appointments or termination or whatever happens is welcome. So it was to address like this, than to leave that to a single member, for instance, to deal with those issues. And then at the end of the day, when accountability has to be done in the legislature, then they alarmed with all with the action of a single member. So they felt that that was urgent, it needs to be made now, while of course the process that is being undertaken at the national level is being done correctly. We are a unitary state because Section 40 states so. Section 40 states so that, and as well as Section 1, of the Constitution, that we're a unitary democratic state and all of that. And of course, Section 40 goes on is that government in the Republic is constituted at the national, provincial, as well as local level. I agree with member that in terms of the SABC as well as Gender Commission, for instance, those ones are done in consultation, of course, with the portfolio committees, the processes. Once the whole process has been undertaken, for instance, with those ones, Parliament plays an active role because those are creatures of the Constitution. For instance, the SABC is the public broadcaster. It's not a state entity. The public broadcaster is the public entity, in other words. So its role is provided there in the Constitution and all of that. Same the Gender Commission and all the other Chapter 9 institutions. So it is Parliament that is responsible even for initiating the appointment of those institutions, because they are more like those constitutional institutions, for instance. Hence, that one it's those ones are conducted differently from state entities, which are the extension. The state entities, one thing which we must understand is that they are extensions of the parent departments. They are part and parcel. They are extension of parent, but they are extension, for instance, of the executive. They are not the same with Chapter 9 institution, under which the Gender Commission and other Public 9 institution fields, as well as the SAB, for instance, and all of that. Well, the issue of the SABC might be debatable there and there, but as we know that there's always that debate that it's not an extension, not supposed to be an extension of the executive, the public institution, and all supposed to be independence. The issue here is the independence. Independence from where? Independence from the executive arm of government. Hence, those ones are treated differently from the ones, all these institutions that are being amended, these provincial entities here, are the extension of the executive. Although that they are at the, they say they are at the what end of the arm of the executive, at the distance of the executive, but at the end of the day, they perform functions or execute powers that in the normal ordinary business they could have been exercised by the executive exco, in other words, or the member of the executive, and all of that. So that is the difference between the two. Hence, these ones felt that because it's part and parcel of their section of the executive, so the legislature should not be involved in the appointment of all of the. Of course, at the end of the day, that doesn't take away the in terms of the separation of powers, the oversight role that Parliament doesn't take that role. If there is, for instance, appointments that are irregular and all of those things, or that are questionable, then the executive and the provincial legislature still plays its role, its inherent role in terms of the constitution of common law and on all of that. It doesn't take away its role. It still plays its role. As same the way Member Hassan have said it, the balance between the separation of powers and intervention, for instance, before things got ugly and all of those things. The oversight function of Parliament allows it to do so whenever there's a need that arising in terms of that. So that role is not taken away in any form or shape. Now, coming to the other ones, this is an amendment bill, members. This is an amendment bill. In other words, it amends principal legislation in a sense, principal legislation and all of that, or original legislation, if I can put it, as an amendment legislation or bill. Now, if I come to GIFA, GIFA was not established in terms of a principal legislation. GIFA was established in terms of a proclamation that was issued by the Premier, of course, on the proposal, on the advice of the MEC for Finance and all of that. Member Matega is correct, there's an advisory committee that it terms, but this as an amending bill, it amends the original acts, not the proclamation and all of that. And of course, that doesn't take away if this act is in place for them to be treated equally. They will be treated the same, even though they are not covered in terms of the bill. The same with the commission. There's no act that establishes the Gauteng Finance Commission, as well as the Gauteng Partnership Fund, partnership, Gauteng Partnership Fund is established in terms of a trust deed, not a proclamation, not an act of parliament, but in terms of a trust deed. So the intention of this bill is not to interfere because it's an amendment bill. It amends original legislation, not the trust deed, which can be, for instance, disestablished at any time and all of that. But still, as I'm saying that, it doesn't stop the appointment, for instance, of the board of the film, Gauteng Film Commission, or the land, the public, the Gauteng Partnership Fund, not to be not to be subjected to this act, because one principle of law is that the law doesn't allow for a vacuum. That's a principle of law. The law doesn't allow for a vacuum. Where an issue is not provided for in terms of the constitutive instrument, such as the proclamation or the deed, or whatever the Gauteng Commission is established in terms of, we look to a practice in the province in terms of the provincial legislation that is applicable to the same entities that falls under the executive. And of course, this practice that is done in terms of the different legislation, of course, then the commissions can also be there. And of course, that all of this legislation, as I've said, the genesis is the executive resolution of the 14th of March 2008, which says all of them, all the appointment of all boards, and the appointment of all chief executive of all provincial public entities must be done, of course, by the executive council and all of that. So the second step in terms of that decision was that we must look at the legislation and amend the legislation in order to be in line with that decision. So yes, this is a first process to amend the original legislation. Then this will necessitate Member Mateke, the amendment, of course, of the trust deed to be in line with these provisions of legislation, as well as that provincial proclamation in respect of GIYDS. If I go to Member Msemang, for instance, the mismatch between the bills introduced and what is being published here, we prepared the presentation in line with the bill as was introduced, certified by state law advisors, of course, and introduced in the provincial legislature. That will be the bill that, of course, is endorsed with the stamp of the state law advisory services and all of that. So we prepared with that, and other matters was just to emphasize the point. But all in all, as I've said in the beginning, that is to rationalize the appointment of board members, and as that is the current thread. All are across, and all other things spoke to that, and to that as that. And then if with our choice of words are not okay, are not correct, then as the chairperson have said, for instance, in line, of course, with the quotation that we have indicated from Jean Jacques Rousseau, the parliament has got every right to do whatever it wants to do with this kind of legislation, because it's got that legislative power to do so. The role of the executive is only to prepare and initiate that legislation for Parliament to process and to adopt it, and all of that. So that is correct. That was what is done, and all of that. As far as the Zondo Commission report and all of it, the bill precedes the Zondo Commission. We all know, members, the drafting, the decision was taken in 2018, and the bill was finalized in 2020. The Zondo report only came this year, 2 years later. But all in all, members, for instance, the the national guidelines for the appointment of persons and CEOs to public entities, the national guidelines and other instruments, of course, calls for this kind of panel to be established, for instance, when it comes to the. But as I've said, these public entities are the extension of the executive. They are performing the powers that, or the functions, or exercising the powers that will ordinarily be performed or are preserved of the executive. Hence, then it is the executive that, as I've said in my presentation, is a principal decision maker, because it is their powers that these public entities are fighting. But in this legislation, we didn't interfere, because this legislation provide for the establishment of panel, for instance, to test the suitability of all these people that has been, for instance, nominated to serve in this board. And then the MEC establishes all of these, panels. And then once the panels have done their work and make the recommendation on all of those, and then all of that is submitted then to the Executive Council to make the ultimate decision regarding the appointment of these public entities and all of that. But the issue of panels are there as recommended by the report of Zondo. So there's nothing that in this bill that is in contradiction with the report of Zondo. The panels are there in this principal legislation. We are not interfering with that. The MEC establishes this panel. They advertise. They do all that thing. And once this panel have assisted the responsible MEC with the suitability of candidates, and then the responsible MEC, as far as the appointment is concerned, then defers to the EXCO, and the EXCO make the ultimate decision about the suitability of people that have been recommended by the MEC based on the advice of course selection panel and all of this. So this is built within the legislation already. What Zondo is proposing is nothing novel as far as the appointment, because that is already encapsulated in the national guidelines, as well as certain legislations that are in place. Of course, members, when they deal with that, will check in the different pieces of legislation and will find those some of those resolutions that have been made. Of course, the issue of the remuneration board, well, that one is it's a novel, because even at national, the MEC, the Minister of Finance, is the one that is being consulted, because, as I've said, is the one that is in charge of the purse, and that it gets that those powers originally from the Constitution, as I've said. So the Constitution delegates that to the member of the to the Minister of Finance when it comes to issues that are related to financial matters and all of that. Similarly, in the provinces, that is why we exchange after consultation, within consultation with the member with the MEC for finance, because the Constitution delegates financial matters originally to the member of finance. The answer is that, of course, Zondo comes with the remuneration board separate from that. But I can vouch, members, even if that will sell. But at the end of the day, as I've made that decision, as I've made reference to that decision of the Constitutional Court when I was speaking about collective and individual accountability of members of cabinet of the executive, the Constitution defers or delegates financial matters to the finance MEC or finance minister, and therefore he must make an independent division, even if that remuneration of the remuneration board will in the end itself, but the ultimate decision, unless the constitution is changed and defers to the board, then that will be said. But at the end of the day, the ultimate decision will rest with the MSc for finance or the cabinet member for responsible for finance, because that is what the constitution decrees. And as I've said, the constitution is the chapter 2 state categorically that the constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any law or conduct that is inconsistent with the constitution is invalid. And it requires that the obligation that are imposed by the constitution, including that one that the MEC for finance or the cabinet member for finance is the one that is charged with the issues that are related to finance, and remuneration and allowances payable to members of board of these governing entities, governing bodies, of course, is a financial matter in itself, unless I am wrong. And that is the issue that I must say. And as I've said, that it doesn't take, even though the removal, the second point, the balance between, of course, the power of the MEC and the legislature that must decide on these appointments. As I've said, that it doesn't take away the oversight. The parliament is vested with oversight over the executive, how the executive fulfills or performs its powers and all of that. It doesn't take away the oversight of the provincial legislature over these appointments and all of that. As I've said, it doesn't state that it must wait until the appointment is complete and all of that. Once the provincial legislature can call the member of the executive or the executive responsible at any time to come and deliver or to respond or to do anything at any time in point and all of that. Their executive powers are continuing. They don't start somewhere on stop at a certain point. It's a continuing function all the time. So it doesn't take away. It's just that as I've said in the beginning, these public entities are the extension of the executive, so they are performing the powers that in any sense, in the original scheme of things, would have been performed by members of the executive. Hence, then, in terms of separation powers, we felt that they should be given the space and the scope to do so, as the executive is also charged to do so by the constitution itself and all of that. So that is the issue. How members then balance that, as the chairperson have said, of course, it depends on them and all of that. And of course, if I move to Member Hassan, this legislation is meant to create the stability in the boards, as members he says, because members, as a member or a responsible member, cannot now just dismiss or terminate membership of the members of these governing bodies without deferring to the executive, as in the past that was possible to do so. So that is meant to strengthen that stability within these boards, other than to diminish it. This is meant that the fact that a single member can't do that on willy-nilly. He has to defer it to the Executive Council. Of course, that means that there should be cogent reasons, for instance, for dismissing or terminating membership of those things and all of that. And that in itself talks to accountability measures to the executive. And the executive, of course, cannot just rubber stamp in all of the decision. The executive is expected to act independently from the member as a collective, consider whatever the member has put, and of course make its own decision based on its own assessment of the situation and all of that, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with the executive and not the single member. Hence of that thing and all of that. So the TIGA, for instance, there was a reference to TIGA, the JEP staff with regard to the theatre. Of course, that is looked after, and members, as I've said, as a chairperson have said, are free if that they feel that needs to be catered now, that could be catered when the provincial legislature deals with the amendments relating to the JEP Act and all of that can be dealt with, and all of that is if there's a need to do so. Because now, if I were to address for my side and leave it, because this bill, the issue why the bill was introduced by the Office of the Premier. My understanding, maybe the DG will decide, will add on. The Premier if is still in the meeting, but the issue that this is the issue that deals with that is why it's called the general laws. It doesn't deal with the public entities falling under the GIYDS, the MEC for economic development, for instance. There are also, of course, the MEC public entities falling under the MEC for transport in that regard. For instance, the Gauteng, all of that. Although 90%, it doesn't mean that because 90%, but there's other MEC that is effect. But then because of that, the logical conclusion then it was felt that it should be introduced by the Office of the Premier. As I've said in the beginning, at the end of the day, the Premier is the repository of the executive authority in the provinces, and where, for instance, an issue struggle across different functions of MEC, then is suitable. Unfortunately, in this regard, there is an MEC that over and above the portfolio that MECs occupies, there is a leader of governing of the government business that is located within the Office of the Premier, and the outgoing Premier, for instance, delegated all legislative matters or matters relating to legislation in the legislature to that MEC. All of that. Hence, the bill was introduced then by the leader of government business, who was delegated this task by the Premier, who is vested with the executive authority of the provinces. Member Chairperson, I hope I have addressed all the question. If I have left any, then I am still here to answer those that I might have left out. And I hope I have responded as thorough as to the best of my ability. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Advocate. I think it was comprehensive. Do you want to add anything, Acting DG or Premier?
No, I'm fine where I am. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Premier.
Fine, thanks.
Members, any follow-up? Okay, thank you very
Chair,
much.
my hand is up, Member Bloom.
Oh, yeah, Honourable Bloom.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Zonda Commission made a recommendation for an independent body to actually assess the suitability qualifications of board members. That's a very serious suggestion, and I think that needs to be seriously considered here, that it's very important that we have, we quite frankly don't have crony political appointments, cadre deployments, in fact, which the Zondo Commission is very critical about, and that there should be independent vetting. So I think that needs to be part of the consideration as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bloom.
If you don't mind, Chair, can I respond to that?
Yes, Premier. Yes, you can come in, Premier.
Can you hear me, Chair? Can you hear me, Chair?
I can hear you. Yes, yes, Premier.
Yes, I'm saying the President, on behalf of all of us, have responded on the Zondo Commission and each and every matter that has been raised, including the issue of the boards and the so-called cater deployment. And it captures everything that the state is going to do. And I really feel that it's cheap politicking if Member Bloom will want to raise it here. There was a member of parliament that was part of this committee in particular, that was deployed by a political party without any credential, any advertisement of any post, anything. And when it's done by those political parties, it's not cater deployment, it's professional deployment. And we must be lectured here on cater deployment. And I hope people understand what is cater deployment. The professional person with credential and potential who's denied to get an access to a certain position on the basis of either the color of their skin or their previous historic challenges. That's cater deployment. You don't want to deploy people who are unqualified, who have no skill or no potential. And you will see even from the response of the President on this particular matter. If Member Bloom didn't read it, can't come and blame us here. He must read that document and it explains it. Even Zondo himself, when you go to the Judicial Commission, for him to be Chief Justice, the ANC and all other political parties recommend him. And we recommend him on the basis of what? Of his skill, of his talent, his qualifications. That is why he's a Chief Justice. The ANC took a decision to recommend him. Why is not challenging his own appointment then and resign if cater deployment is something that needs to be criticized the way it's been criticized? We must not come here and score cheap political parties. A bodybuilder was deployed by the DA, not qualified in the office of the mayor in Ekurhuleni. The mayor in
Premier.
When a public protector told somebody in Swan that this particular individual does not qualify, that person was deployed to be in Ekurhuleni, regardless of a public protector report. I don't think we should control our. We are presenting a bill on the basis of its professionalism, compliance, mainstreaming of how government boards should function, how they should be rewarded, and how the remuneration should work, and how they should be accountable. If people want to drag other political things to this meeting, I really don't think that will be fair and proper. And that's the reason why we're presenting this issue. So, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Premier. I wouldn't like this to deteriorate and we lose track of what we are about here. But I will not suppress you, Member Msimang.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I also don't want this to deteriorate into a political squabble, because we can do both. But the point that has been raised here was that there are recommendations that are coming from the Zondo Commission. And as I said earlier on, that part of that is what has now been put into commissions. And I was asking a specific question in terms of how do we then ensure that which is now been recommended as to be looked at and to be fixed by the commissions, are we ahead of it while we are now dealing with this particular bill, which then should be something that we should then be able to, going forward, ensure that it is incorporated, that we don't have to come here again and have to redo the whole thing, because now the commission is recommending something else, which then becomes now a new bill. And this is basically what had been asked here. Now, we can go about who's appointed in what office and all of that, and, their qualifications and all of that. But obviously, then there is a commission that was sanctioned by the government, paid for by the taxpayers, which has made recommendations, which the president has openly said these are things that now, will have to be actioned through the commissions. And if we are to follow that, then it then says that when looking at this bill, we need to then go and say, where is it lagging, Chairperson? Now, if we do that, then we do away with our own internal politicking. We're doing what is happening at a national level. We're doing, we're doing with the guidance that has now been provided, which the president is saying we need to look at and need to action going forward in terms of rectifying some of the mistakes that had been raised or some of the things that had actually transpired. And this is where I think we need to really limit ourselves in terms of the engagements that are taking place here. And I would recommend that, going forward, that perhaps be done. And one of the formal recommendations that I want to put for adoption by this body is that perhaps we look at getting somebody, or even our researcher chairperson, who's going to look at the report, and specifically when it comes to the appointment of boards and CEOs and what is being recommended there, and let it be brought here so that we're able to then see where the gaps in terms of what is the current proposal in terms of this bill and what is then actually the recommendations that is coming and coming from the commission's report, and what the president is actually saying, that we're able to then align those, and then we know that we're at least not far off and we're not deviating from what is actually happening at the national sphere of government. Thank you, Chair.
You, Member Mateke?
No, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I wanted to suggest that we move. I think you've made a suggestion that we are now being given an opportunity to look at the bill that was introduced in 2020. We have an opportunity to then make inputs, and I think also Member Hassan will have also raised almost similar issues that Member Msimang is raising in terms of us as a committee having an opportunity to then look at this proposed amendment. It's now within our own court that we will be able to then move forward. So I wanted to suggest that we move before we leave. Before we reduce this meeting into a political playground, because we can equally do the same. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Thank you, members. I think, as I said before, the bill is with us now. We're happy that the Office of the Premier has been able to present it, and the rationale and the reasons why it's introduced through the Premier's office and the OCPOL, and what is the intention and the objectives of the bill. It's upon us that our researchers of the three committees work together to really do a deep analysis and present to us, and we engage as a committee, and we make our own suggestions and submissions, and then we go to the public, and the public does the same. And then we finalize our report as we see fit. For me, that should be the way forward. Thank you very much, Advocate, and thank you very much, Premier, for the input, and thank you very much, members, for your valuable engagement. Let's move and go to the next item. I think the next item is the Office of the Premier's annual report and the responses.
Chairperson?
Yes. Who's there?
My apology. It's Member Msimang.
Yes, it's Member Msimang.
I had put a formal submission, Chairperson. Is that adopted or is it rejected?
Of our researchers going into that should be part of their work, Msimang.
No. Chair, what I'm asking, remember, we are supposed to be going out there and we are supposed to be guiding, if you like, when we go and present. What I'm asking is that will we be able to then do that, have that, what I'm asking for in terms of what the differences are, so that we're able to then do a comparison ourselves before going out to public participation. That's basically what I'm asking, Chair.
Yeah, for me, we don't even need to adopt it. It's just to ask our researchers to expand their scope, because they are expected to report next week on the comparison and so forth. So they must include the suggestion that you're going to go and look at this report that you are talking about, and the suggestion made there, so that they form part of those analyses.
Chairperson.
I agree. I don't disagree. I agree.
Chair.
One Roy.
Oh, Macheki.
Yes, Macheki.
Yeah, Chair. Therefore, it means we must amend our schedule so that we don't rush into doing things. Much as I agree with the proposal, yes.
Yes, yeah. No. Perfect. I think we must relook at it because we must not rush and be seen to be just crossing the T's and dotting the I's in this important piece of legislation. We agree, Member Msima. It's agreed. Can we then move Office of the Premier?
Yeah, Chair, that Member Litsia here, the Chair of CSSL.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just want to make an input that says, as far as our committee is concerned, I think we'll acknowledge that we'll wait for the bill to be presented to the committee for its interrogation. At this point in time, I think the committees are still engaging on the bill. We'll await that formal presentation to the committee and also request that we be excused from the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Office of the Premier?
Thank you so much, Chair. I'll ask the acting DG to lead us on this item. Acting DG.
Thank you very much, Premier, and good morning, Chairperson and honorable members and colleagues from the Office of the Premier and the Legislature. We are presenting the 2021 annual report, and we would like to, if you move to the first slide, that slide was just outlining the presentation. But Chair and honorable members, we would like to start by indicating that on the 7th of October, Premier Lesotho was elected by the Gauteng Provincial Legislature as the Premier for Gauteng. One of the critical issues that Premier Lesotho had indicated in line with what we are going to be reporting on is to continue with the implementation of GGT 2030 as our blueprint, but also focus on certain aspects that relate to us moving towards the conclusion of the term. At the heart of it were issues of the economic recovery and reconstruction, issues of focusing and strengthening our fight against crime, corruption, vandalism, and the changing of the life or conditions of people in townships, informal settlements, and hostel. And I thought we should start there, Chair. If you go to the next slide, Shireen, that the importance of that suggests that out of the 7 priorities as we're moving towards the conclusion of the term, the elevated priorities will be those that I've just mentioned, as you could see on this diagrammatic representation, that in the first instance, as I said earlier, issues of the economy, because Gauteng is an important player in the economy, and then issues of fighting crime, so that indeed we ensure that as we move towards the outer years of the MTF, win the battle against crime, but also invest in township, including the prioritization of health and wellness of communities. This is another important area that has been elevated as a critical area of focus. And I suspect that one of the reasons why Premier would have raised us with us in our engagement is that there is a need to really ensure that we deal with some of the outcomes, or rather some of the impacts of COVID that relates to mental issues, mental illness, but also that relates to the functioning and a need to improve our hospitals as they service communities. But another critical area is the area of strengthening the capacity of the state, which has been there. But I think the issue that Premier has been raising with us sharply is that how do we make sure that we don't just theorize and conceptualize, or rather remain at the conceptual stage with regards to the issues of, if you move to the next slide, the issues of building a state that's got capacity. I think the slide is still standing, Sharon. The state must be able to drive the agenda of development, but also the state must be able to drive and redirect resources towards the issues of townships and so forth and so on. And this fits very well with the recent bill that we have passed in this House, the Township Economic Development Act, which we believe would, if being implemented with the greatest of discipline and focus, will change the lives of people where they are. If we look at the quality of life survey, the research that usually is done by the GCRO, it does suggest that the outer part or the periphery of the urban core, which is mainly townships, there are still challenges, and that's why this important focus that whatever we do, we have to work around making sure that where people live, particularly in townships, whether townships where there are hostels, there are informal settlements, we deal with the challenges in those areas. That also includes issues of investing in infrastructure as a critical area that we have to deal with. Can move to slide number 7, which indeed we are just trying to demonstrate that at the heart of everything we've been doing, particularly looking at the roadmap in terms of 21-22 financial year, we have always been about realizing the National Development Plan, Vision 2030, as adopted by Parliament, but also, as I indicated earlier, focusing on the 7 priorities. But also, as the Office of the Premier, we are directly responsible for making sure that those priorities that I mentioned earlier, including the elevated priorities, will be remains our guiding light. But you'll also recall, Chair, that at the heart of this work, if you move to the next slide, it has always been about the transformation, the modernization, and the reindustrialization of our city region. And that's why, broadly speaking, if we now make sure that the areas that have been elevated are not only elevated, but are included in this process of reprioritization as we're moving towards the reprioritization, not only of the budget, but of the plans of departments, and making sure that these are also part and parcel of the strategic plans of departments. It will really assist us to make the necessary changes, spatially, socially, and economically in these parts, in the parts of the Gauteng city region or in Gauteng. The next slide just further confirms and makes the point about who we are and the kind of province we've always wanted to achieve. But if you move to slide number 14, then maybe slide number 15, we then begin to demonstrate what exactly we've been able to do under the year under review. And that in the main relates to the work we've done in response to the COVID-19 and the fact that we managed to control the spread, and we were able to pull together resources, including the vaccination campaign, which was an important intervention in making sure that we manage the spread, but also investing in issues of vaccination, whether it's about issues of OHA wellness in relation to ventilations, sanitizers, and so forth and so on. These are some of the things that we did together with the men and women who are in our facilities, health facilities, and across government departments, but also working with society. So some of the critical achievements relate to the fact that we worked not only government to government, but with civil society. With regards to the year under review, we were able to administer about 9 million or so vaccines. Of course, beyond that, I think we had reached more than 10.1 or 10.2 million in terms of the vaccine. But also we're able to respond to establishing, if you go to the next slide, and investing in what we consider to be an important intervention in terms of economic recovery, and that related to, among others, the introduction and the passing into law the bill, which was the Township Economic Development Bill. Again, it is this act that we think as even linked to the earlier discussion, will assist us to make the necessary changes and creating a provincial-wide bylaw that will not only be implemented by the province, but also will be implemented working with the municipalities as they are critical partners in ensuring that we create a space and an environment for SMMEs, the township SMMEs, women-led businesses, but also supporting people with disability in line with the targeted sectors, which will be the indicators which we will be able to indicate. One of the critical aspects that we like to indicate in terms of through the acts of the legislature, we want to make sure that the issues of procurement in line with the acts that we had passed are also done in a manner that ensures clean and good governance. And that's why the instituting of an open tender system has been one of the critical interventions that the government has been able to introduce. There has been discussions also with other municipalities to work towards this. Of course, there are challenges, but critical to this is the issue of making sure that we fight corruption and making sure that the processes of tender and the processes of providing services are done in a manner that is transparent. And that's why in terms of the challenges of the PPE, government has introduced fraud detection reviews to an extent that we are looking at almost above 10 million, including the fact that at the end of the day, just coming from the recent Exco Lekgotla and acknowledging the report that was given with regards to the state of ethics in the province, the Premier Lesufi has instructed that we work towards dealing with the challenges identified in that report, particularly in as far as it relates to issues of supply chain, challenges in the system of government, so that as much as possible, we build a government that is corrupt-free, but a government that is able to deliver services on time and on point in terms of the financial resources. Of course, we've also been able to, particularly the Office of the Premier, receive clean audit with no financial material findings for 21-22. This is the 19th audit in a row since 2013-14. This, if you move to the next slide, is an important intervention. We think that one of the critical indicators is that beyond this, we must make sure that the rest of the government departments are able to work towards the same. The rest of the slides between 18 and 20 demonstrate how we were organizing ourselves in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we thought it is an important part of our achievement and the work that we think going forward we have to draw lessons with regards to this area of work. If we go to slide 21, we further demonstrate our critical performance in terms of the work that we were supposed to achieve as we move towards the realization of the strategic plan that we had submitted to the legislature, the 2021 and 2024 strategic plan. One of the first and critical issues relates to what I would have raised earlier, how we were organized in response to the COVID-19, the establishment of the service delivery war room, but also the issues of the frontline service delivery monitoring, if you go to the next slide. And even this work, we are doing it together with the legislature, particularly the issues around partitions, or rather petitions as they come, because it is something that we think as citizens raise their issues, whether at frontline services offices, these issues must be attended to. And we were part and parcel of the session that was convened by the Petitions Committee to make sure that we, together with them, commit to working with the legislature in addressing petitions as they arise. One of the investments and achievements we want to highlight is the fact that through the ongoing Tigrisano Service Delivery War Room, we are spending a lot of time on the ground. I must indicate that Premier Lesufi has insisted that one of the things we have to do on an ongoing basis, if you look at the campaign that has been revived on anti-substance abuse, which has really demonstrated the need for government to spend more time with people. This will also enhance, is being supported by the Central War Room that has been able to track and now understand what exactly is the magnitude of the problem on substance abuse. So we think the investment, or rather the achievement that we had made on the establishment of the Central War Room is assisting us, and to an extent that we are now able to track the cases as they are submitted to us, and we're also in a position to now know which part of the province has got the largest problem of the substance abuse using this system. And our centers are able to, working with social workers, able to deal with these issues. Of course, one of the issues is the issue that targets in relation to our budget. There has been some critical achievements. This also includes the fact that we still report for purposes of the 2021 SEPO 1 million, as we had always reported. But it's important to indicate that indeed there has been a shift. We had come to the OCPOL committee to present the repackaged and improved manner in which we are responding to issues of youth in the province. I must also indicate just on this slide that as we're dealing with that work, which will also be something that the committee is expecting us to speak on, Premier Lesufi has asked that in terms of the organization of the departments, something that has been happening but not yet formalized is that the Department of Education now must be looked at as Department of Education and Youth, which means the function on the programs of young people will now be part and parcel of the work that the Department of Education is doing, albeit that the policy monitoring will still be part and parcel of what we do as the center. But critical to this work is that the existing work that we are doing with GDE in relation to foundation phase, primary, secondary, the bursaries that we give, and so forth and so on, that relates to addressing the youth not in employment, youth not in education, and youth not in training, will now be structured properly by supporting that idea that GDE is now going to be focusing on that as well. It's important that also with regards to issues of procurement, we've been trying to support as much as possible military veterans across the 5 regions. This is another important area because we're dealing with people who might have provided service to this country as soldiers, and now that they are out of service, they need to be supported. So through this work, we are continuously supporting them, working with the National Department of Military Veterans. There will be an MEC directed leading this work, and a team in the Office of the Premier that has been making sure that we deal with these issues. Of course, issues of corruption, fighting corruption, making sure that we've got a public service that is corrupt, public service that is capable and is driven by ethics, relates to the successful work we're doing in terms of vetting, but it also relates to the issues that we're doing in making sure that issues of lifestyle audit are also attended to, including the fact that through the integrity management unit and the integrity units across departments, we continue to refer cases to law enforcement agencies, and those cases, they are being attended to. And in most instances, if you move to the next slide, despite the MOUs that we have got to work within the timeframes of the agencies, but it is something that we're pushing. It is important to highlight that the Gauteng provincial government, I think, has been one of the leading provinces in the fight against GBV. We have made a contribution to the legislation on gender-based violence and femicide. Even the summit that has happened recently, we had prepared thoroughly to make sure that we make a contribution. Some of the highlights that we've been doing very well, partnering with the Department of Community Safety, relates to issues of green doors, working with police to ensure that women, as they report cases of gender-based violence, are attended to by our police stations, because it has been it used to be one of the weaknesses in the whole system, including the whole entire criminal justice system. It is important also to indicate that we are bringing also partners in this regard to work with us to deal with the issues of gender responsive budgeting. This tool is a tool that we've now institutionalized, working with Treasury, so that all our departments begin to demonstrate how best they are helping us achieve the 40% support to women. And this is also in addition to the 50% target in terms of women being in senior positions in the province. It is also important to highlight that we've now finally established in a fully fledged LGBTIQA directorate in the Office of the Premier, so that we're able to work very closely with the sector, support their programs as much as possible, to an extent that some of the engagements that we've had recently relate to even working with family members, even family units or that have been established to make sure that we support those that are within this sector. And I think it's been going very well. I have highlighted the Township Economy Bill, but also have highlighted that we have done well with regards to vaccinations. If you move to the next slide. I have also reported that we have done well in terms of the tracking on the number of outreach programs. As I said earlier, one of the critical things that the executive does is to spend more time engaging with people. And in those engagements, beyond the dashboard, there are issues that communities raise, whether through the recent Imbizo that was held at Sidibeng. There's a system that we've put in place that as people raise issues, those issues are returned to, people are attended to in terms of resolving the cases, and to an extent that we are doing well in that regard. Yes, of course, we can do better, but as the commitments are made, there is a team that has been put in place to address these issues. The rest of the slides, if you come to the next one, begins to demonstrate that what we were trying to show you earlier in terms of our service delivery tracking system, we are able to indicate as to what are the critical issues that communities are raising, and out of those, how many have been resolved, how many of those are being attended to, and how many are active. I think the important part that we would like to indicate is that with this system, because it has evolved from the presidential hotline to what it has become to date, we are tracking this in partnership with councillors on the ground, the community development workers, ward committees, and many other existing structures that are there, but also bringing in national government with regards to challenges of electricity, challenges of water, and so forth and so on. So in a way, this kind of way of working assists us to make sure that we even avert possible protest as and when they would arise. And that's why when you look at the, I think it's the municipal IQ, they would used to report about the fact that there's a lot of protest in Gauteng, but this is now assisting us because at least the energies are directed to the service delivery war room that is based at one central, and they are able to attend to communities as they come and are able to respond to their issues. And that's why even with the recent commitment that Premier has put in place in terms of the anti-substance abuse, using this system, we could easily put up this dashboard and now are able to track where exactly are the facilities that are assisting us to respond to these issues. With regards to policy developments, if you move to slide 32, we are able to indicate that there's been issues that we dealt with in terms of the amendments that relates to the following key policies. One, the determination regarding the salaries and allowances payable to members, a very, very important intervention for the legislature in particular, but also for members. The establishment of the Gauteng Provincial Initiation Coordinating Committee. This is another important intervention because despite the fact that we are an urban province, the cultures still remain. People are continuously practicing their cultures, and therefore through the Department of COCTA, the Premier has had to work with the MEC of COCTA to ensure that this committee is established. In fact, we are going to be, Premier will be publicly unveiling the committee so that we demonstrate our commitment with regards to this area of work. One of the critical issues relates to the work we're doing to strengthen our work in terms of the AIDS Council support. It has now formally been moved to the Office of the Premier as per the request or the prescripts of national, in line with the South African National Council Act, and also making sure that at the end of the day, the Premier in the province is the face and the leader of the work we're doing with regards to the fight against HIV and AIDS, as is in the case at national, is led by the Deputy President, and therefore the same happens with municipalities going forward in partnership with the civil society. I'll skip the rest and then go to predetermined objectives program performance to date. If you look at slide 34, the 91% non-financial performance obtained in terms of the Office of the Premier. That relates to issues of skills, as I was saying earlier. That critical to this was the issue of open tender system integrity, improving integrity of procurement processes. As honorable members would appreciate that at the heart of this work is to make sure that as much as possible, all SSM members in the Office of the Premier and across the system are vetted, including the fact that as much as possible, those that need to be reported, including general cases, are also reported. That's some of the critical work and achievements that we've been able to attend to in line with the state of ethics report. There are follow-ups that we're dealing with regards to the fact that Premier has asked that the team, which is the Gauteng Integrity Ethics and Advisory Committee, the civil society-led committee, continues to work with us as it has always been guiding us to deal with these issues. One of the critical areas as well is the fact that there has been investments to support the sectors or those that have been marginalized in the economy. That also relates to Black people, women, youth, people with disability, but also township spend in line with the Township Act, because we've got to track and understand as to what exactly, if you like, use the notion of following the money. If you say we are going to the townships, where in these townships and who is being supported in these townships. Of course, there are issues of inclusive quality education and healthcare. We also make a contribution in that regard, and that also relates to the support and the work we did during COVID-19, making sure that as much as possible we support the work that has got to do with the response to the COVID-19. Of course, the other critical area relates to issues of social cohesion, a citizenry, activist government, and it also links to the work I was speaking to in terms of Integrisano, because without that appreciation, government will not be a government of the people. So as much as possible, we continue to deepen social cohesion by supporting and working with critical sectors of the community. And that's why even in our recruitment, as the Office of the Premier, including the rest of the departments, one of the critical areas we track is to make sure that people with disability and other sectors of the community are recruited so that we can indeed work in line with our constitutional obligations of building a South Africa that belongs to all who live in it, despite of race, class, and gender. We are doing work. We have been doing work in terms of the international collaboration, both working with the embassies and also working with the transnational chambers as you move to the next slide. And that's why one of the critical areas that Premier Lesotho has asked us to do just in the next few months is to make sure that there's continuous engagements with embassies, but also with chambers, so that we can be able to continue to strengthen ties and make sure that Gauteng continues to be the home of a destination for foreign direct investors, but also a home for those that want to do business in the continent. With regards to the overall performance, in terms of the trend, if you go to slide 38, we begin to demonstrate how from 2018 to date, we have been improving performance as per the indicators that we have identified, but also submitted as part of our APPs that have been taken through this committee. If you look at 2019, 18-19, of the 67 indicators reported, we achieved 75%. With regards to 19-20, 77% of those reported. We achieved 67, which is about 87%. So if you want to do an analysis, I think to a very great extent, we are doing well, but we believe that a lot more can be done. And that's why we then go to the next slide to demonstrate program by program in relation to our performance. And of course, program 1, we are all aware that it's our internally focused program, but program 2 and 3 is transversal in a sense that, as you'd appreciate, the Office of the Premier provides strategic direction to the rest of the departments and the Gauteng City region. And as a result, this is where its performance is quite important. Of course, program 1 is the engine because it is the administrative support that must be given so that the program 2 and 3 can succeed. And that relates to issues of providing support, monitoring. If you go to the next slide, monitoring, working with departments to make sure that strategic plans, alignment, indicators against the priorities. And that's why even now, as we have indicated in this presentation, the elevated priorities, one of the critical things that the Office of the Premier is doing now is to go and make sure that departments, as they are moving towards the reprioritization, both in terms of those priorities, but also in terms of the budget, they are able to ensure that those are included in their current plans. And then we put systems to track quarterly their reports and improve as we move along. Because there are areas of underperformance that we highlight that start from slide 41 and up until slide 42, just to indicate that one of the issues relates to percentage of valid invoices paid within 21 days of receipt. This is an important area to track because if we do not improve controls in this regard, we might end up not being able to achieve our 10-15 days payment outside of the normal PFMA requirement of 30 days. So we're investing a lot to correct those, including working with the Department of eGov in this regard. The issue of the number of interventions to improve women representation in GPG, this is an important area of work in line with the obligations of the accounting officer in terms of the 8 principles of HODs. We just recently held a session with all the senior managers, or rather SMS, in the Office of the Premier, but all HODs are meant to do that. The intention is to then say, in terms of our HR plan, with the vacancies that are existing, what do we do to make sure that as we recruit, we focus on making sure that we work towards the achievement of 50% or more. I must say that even now, the team that Premier leads, I think there's in the EMT, there's myself as a male. I think the rest of the team members, DDG for communication is a woman. DDG for ESSM, DDG for integrity management, and the 2 acting DDGs. So in a way, you can see that there's a demonstration of that commitment of making sure that we don't just say we're doing this work, but we work towards that achievement. Of course, in terms of our annual financial statement, we will also be briefed. We will be brief if you go to slide 46. 46, of course, our main appropriation has declined from 859 in 2021 to 14 to in 21-22. There has been adjustment in terms of the main appropriation, which was upwards 714 to 867. Yes, there has been useful and important spending. Part of it responds to the challenges that we have. We have had underspending in terms of the budget, and that relates to the fact that we have to respond to issues of concluding the Life SCD Many project, and we can't not respond to that as part of the commitment that was made. And as a result, we have got to have a very rigorous process to ensure that those that come through, they are the ones that are qualifying, and we continue to pay as and when those go through the scrutiny. We are working towards the conclusion of this work, but it doesn't mean that those that come and are qualifying will not be paid. And that's why we have got to work with Treasury to do what we call the ring fencing of the funds that have got to do with the conclusion or the payment of those that qualify in terms of the Life SCD Many. Of course, other related issues in terms of underspending relate to issues of SIU with regards to the delayed processes of payment more than any other thing. And of course, the time it also takes to transfer the funds to OOP, but from OOP to GCRA and also to GCRO. GCRA because they have to assist us with issues of skills training, as that's what they are established for. GCRA as part and parcel of our research agenda, that's what they do for us. And then of course we go to unauthorized, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We also do outline as to what would have cost irregular expenditure, particularly in the 21-22 on the services that was rendered by, I think it's Dlamini Whale Communications. And I think there's an old one of Woodford exclusive rentals, but CFO will further clarify. I think it relates to the work we did at the time of the African Investment Forum, but the team will clarify. Of course, some of the issues relate to the fact that as we encounter these challenges, we've got to work through getting Treasury approval, and I think there's been favorable responses from Treasury in addressing some of these issues. It is important, I think it's repeating the point that possible claims from the department that in future will result in level demanding arbitration, and some of those, of course, we will be able to deal with them because we have made a commitment as government. In terms of governance issues, what we are demonstrating is the fact that the Office of the Premier as the center of government, or including as the strategic coordinator, there are critical structures that help us coordinate issues in supporting the Premier, and as he leads the entire executive and government as per the constitutional imperatives. The first critical of those structures is the Executive Council itself, which takes decisions on the work of council, on the work of the provincial government, supported by the cluster system that we have in place, including the technical teams that relates to issues of HOD forums. These structures have been assisting us to make sure that we improve not only decision making, but we improve delivery on the task at hand. We did indicate that we also used the COVID structures that we had established to make sure that we are able to move with speed in addressing those issues. There are SCOPA resolutions, which is the last slide on slide 53, and those SCOPA resolutions under review. I think we have been able to respond to them, and some have been duly accepted by a formal sitting, particularly on the 25th of March. Those that need the attention, we are going to be able to deal with them so that as much as possible, we are compliant, including making sure that issues that relate to coming out of the AG in terms of the findings, even those are attended to and have been addressed on an ongoing basis. Chairperson and Premier members, I think that is the long and short of the report in as far as the summary of the 2021-22 report of the Office of the Premier. And then there was the issue of the youth, which we can on if the chair agrees. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would suggest that you just continue with your interventions on the outcome of the youth workshop that the OCPOL had, because you touched on the youth issues in your annual report, so that your members engage once.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. No, thank you very much, Chair. I think in the last session, the committee did indicate that how we should demonstrate this work. I think the first point, with just to reiterate it, but the Chief Director for GIYDS is here. Maybe I should ask her to conclude this report. Just shortly that we were part of the workshop that was convened by the OCPOL, and I think it was a useful issue. One of the issues that was raised was the lack of government monitoring systems during the program implementation process. There was a recommendation that we must set indicators that can be used for various interventions. We then came to the OCPOL to present a study that was done by MISTRA on the issues of TEPO 1 million, but also on the work that has been done with regards to youth intervention. That report, among others, highlighted that there is a need to repackage and improve the work of TEPO, of youth intervention. And that's why, informed by that report, we have now been able, in addition to having appointed a youth advisory panel, we are now in a position to have ensure that that youth advisory panel, in the next slide, has been able to conclude on the Gauteng integrated youth development strategy, and that youth development strategy has specific pillars, and those 4 pillars will then form part of the indicators that we'll be tracking in addressing challenges of young people in the province. With regards to some of the short-term youth development programs that end without tangible skills being gained or acquired, yes, it's an important point. And one of the things we are recommending is the issues of that has been recommended, empowerment training opportunities. Premier Lesufi has raised this point, as I was saying earlier, in terms of us getting this work we're doing with youth to be linked to the work that was done through the Department of Education, particularly the GCRA. So in a way, Chair, one of the critical issues that even in that workshop that was raised was an appreciation of the work of GCRA. We were listening to young people, that young people were even appreciating of that work. So this intervention by Premier Lesufi will help us make sure that the work that the panel has put in place with regards to the packaging and repackaging will assist us to address those issues. There was an issue in as far as lack of accessibility to government information. Government departments must ensure accessibility of online information to empower youth. That work indeed is in place. One of the things that, in addition to what we are indicating now, Premier has said to us, look, working with eGov, make sure that eGov across the system is able to increase connectivity, including the issues of online, the website, but also in schools. So we are really going to push that aspect of work as much as possible. Then one of the next things we do, we demonstrate, is the fact that we are spending not enough, but a lot of resources in a very clustered way in terms of the work that we are doing. That relates to issues of youth not in employment, youth not in training, and youth not in education. So that target was for 2022-23. It's about 1 million or so, with a budget of 3 million. But we have to make sure that all the departments are able to achieve what we have set to achieve in terms of their spending, because this is the biggest problem across the province. Then one of the things we demonstrate in terms of the pathways and creating the labor market safety net for youth, working with the GCRA. And that's why I think, as I was saying right at the beginning, the importance of the intervention by Primary Sufi, that we structure and strengthen the work of youth, working with the Department of Education, will assist us deal with the young people right from the young age, but also as and when they're in matric, including the pathways as in them finishing and what are the opportunities we're creating. We don't just give people bursaries, but we follow them through and also make sure that we create opportunities for them in terms of the next part. The next slide then ends up demonstrating what we call the pathway to economic activity, so that not only with regards to training in high school, but we provide this work. And this is also something that we are going to do, working on this anti-substance abuse program. One of the things that we were doing in the recent weeks or so, working with the social development, is to strengthen this aspect, so that when people, the users, get adopted or rather accepted into our facilities, we must make sure that they are skilled and they are also able to not to return to their old habits because there are no activities that they are dealing with. So through this process and the work we're doing through the Gauteng integrated strategy, we must be able to support the young people in that. The youth advisory panel has been able, if you go to the next slide, has been able to do the amendments. We didn't do a lot of the demonstrating here. They must still go to the Executive Council to present their work since they were appointed, so that as soon as they are able to do that and Executive Council has adopted this work, I think we will then come back. Premier will direct us to come back to yourselves, report as to how now, in addition to the decision of strengthening the work using GDE, and out of the work that the Gauteng Youth, the civil society-led Gauteng Youth Advisory Panel has picked up as they were crisscrossing the province in the last few months. Chair, I think that covers a lot of the issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that report and the annual report on the youth interventions. Honorable members, any takers? Member Alberts?
Thank you, Chair. I just have two questions with regard to oversight on procurement and possible fraud and corruption in the future. I think on page 17 of the slide, mention is made of the Gauteng Provincial Government championing procurement reform by instituting an open tender system to avoid and combat pervasive corruption within the tendering procedures. I might be mistaken, but I don't think, well, at least I have not seen how that system exactly works. I would like to have more information on that. And then secondly, with regards to the Personal Protective Equipment Scandal, GPG has introduced fraud detection reviews on all contracts above 10 million rand. Can we also have sight of exactly what those fraud detection review procedures are consist of and how they exactly work, so that we can also just see whether these systems are up to standard and does provide proper oversight, and whether we can improve them from our side or not. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Member Alberts. I don't see any hands. Acting DG, can you respond to that?
Sorry, Chair, my hand is up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, my hand is also up. Member Chair.
Is it Member Bloom and Member Fuchs?
That's correct.
Okay, in that order.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the fraud detection review, it's not just those transactions under 10 million. We have split billing, and we've got major corruption in our hospitals because bills are split to just under R500,000 rand. You see 495, 498, and I think that that's another way to pick up. So we need to look at smaller amounts as well because of split billing. Just a suggestion there. Secondly, failure, because this body was supposed to monitor all the construction of the COVID projects, the ABC, the alternative building technology, and most importantly, because it was a massive waste, the Anglo-Ashanti Hospital, $500,000 completely wasted. Delivery support unit didn't pick anything up, it seems, and most of those building projects were wasted. There's a massive failure of oversight there, and we still need accountability for the Anglo-Ashanti Hospital. How could such a disaster happen? If the monitoring clearly failed there, it's something that should have been picked up very early. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Bloom. I made a mistake, members, but I don't want to close you up, Member Fuchs. The department only gave us the annual report, but they did not go to the responses emanating from the questions from the committee. My fear is that members will ask questions that maybe we have already asked and we sent it to the department. You did not, acting TG, deal with the responses. Are you there, acting TG?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much.
But before you do that, let's hear the Honorable Fuchs. Honorable Fuchs.
Thank you very much, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, sir. So when we look at the Interisano commitments, Chair, my question is, which body, committee, office is responsible for oversight on Interisano undertakings? Because, based on this report, we see 54% of the commitments were actually achieved. And to be frank, that's nothing to be proud of. So the question is, who is responsible, number one? And number two, why have we failed in terms of those Interisano commitments? And we understand the importance of it, but clearly there's a problem. And I think the commitments that were not met, number one, and the reasons for that failure is something that needs to be discussed and evaluated. Then, Chair, in the context of the slides we saw earlier on, we talk about infrastructure. Now, I don't know, when government starts talking about infrastructure, I get a glazed look, because we've been talking about infrastructure for so many years. We understand the importance of infrastructure development as it buoys up and supports the economy. But we've failed dismally, and this administration, Chair, has not been kind to infrastructure. And despite many attempts to raise these issues and to call for evaluation and interventions, I'm afraid nothing has happened. So, for example, the Department of Infrastructure Development does not produce value for money, does not complete projects on time and within budget. And so any undertaking as it relates to infrastructure, I just don't believe anymore. What is required, Chair, is a very careful evaluation of the reasons why we are unable to develop value for money infrastructure, and it requires intervention, Chair. And I'm saying that, and I'll keep on saying that, unless there's a very careful evaluation and an intervention, we will not meet any of our goals in terms of infrastructure. And yes, Chair, so that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Fuchs. With those questions, and Digit, we'll start with the responses that were sent to you, and then deal with the latter questions. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I will start with the questions, and then my colleagues, particularly the DDG Integrity, will respond to the issues, and then if there are additions, we will. Then the Premier will take over. So the first one was the question that relates to the report on the progress in terms of the Gauteng Eastern Cape capacity rail. I think the first thing to indicate is that yes, this project is a project that is in our space, but it's mainly led by, driven by Transnet, working with 2 national departments and the 2 provinces, which is ourselves and the Eastern Cape. It is mainly about making sure that there is improvement of the movement of goods, particularly the automotive sector has been the one that has been quite interested in this, in working with us in this. Just a few weeks, a week or 2 ago, we had met with one of the big the automotive sector investors who have continued to commit themselves to Gauteng, that is Ford, and they are equally interested in this, so that the issue of movement of goods towards the shore and closer to the harbors. So that's the one issue. This project has also been part of the registered project to SIP in terms of it being registered and also working with Infrastructure South Africa. We're trying to get it at that level so that it can receive the necessary attention as part of the recent gazetting of the 6 SIP projects, which is the SIP 2050 project book that National is driving through the Infrastructure South Africa. On the procurement target spent, or the OP must furnish the committee with the monetary value of the procurement target spent. We have detailed that earlier in the annual report by indicating the number of, I think it was slide, if I'm not mistaken, Chair, is the slide that indicates the number of people. I think slide 34. So that work has been there, and even on slide yes, I think it's there. So for us, we have been able to deal with that. Of course, the targets might not be what we want to achieve, because in the first instance, I think for people it is 77%. For youth is 30%. For women is 40%. But we do indicate as to where we are, and we do want to do better, particularly because these are sectors of our. Regarding the configuration of the GSRA, the OOP should provide the committee with an update. Yes, ideally, we were wishing that we reposition, but we are working with the National Treasury Government Technical and Advisory Center, what is called GTEC, as part of the rationalization of all our institutions or agencies. Even in the recent Lekgotla, Premier has instructed that we need to finish this process so that we're in a position to ensure that GSRA is benchmarked appropriately, repositioned appropriately, so that almost like what we have as the Gauteng City Region Observatory, our GSRA assists us beyond our primary foundation phase, dealing with the issues that we're dealing with. So we will be able to return with that, having concluded the report. Number 4, the committee says we must provide the reasons for non-achievement targets under the legal services. In relation to the project on the reorganization of legal services in the province, the indicator was moved to the operational plan. During the annual adjustment period in September, a service provider has been appointed and delivered a comprehensive report. We are now at consultation with HODs to ensure that running into the 2022-23 financial year. The work is concluded, and then we can be able to take the outcomes of this exercise to the Executive Council as much as possible. We were hoping it will be quicker, but it did take some time, hence the issues with regards to underspending. But that also relates to the rationalization of the Gauteng statute book. The indicator was moved to the operational plan during the annual adjustment period, which is something that is acceptable. But also we are going to prepare submission to do the project in-house because we think that we do have the capacity in the Office of the Premier to do this work. Provincial Communication Services had planned the commissioning 3 qualitative research studies. What was the reason for non-achievement of this area of work? The change in environment, particularly in as far as it relates to the impact of COVID during this period, did conflicted us in terms of, or impacted us in terms of data collection. And I think in addition to this, you would recall that even when we did data collection for the quality of life survey, we had struggled during this period of COVID. And I think that's how we then ended up with this challenge. However, a quantitative study was conducted, which still met the objective in assisting us because we were not able to do face-to-face focus groups. That was the reason why we had the challenge. Furthermore, below in the financial report on institutional response to COVID-19, while the detail exists, it is worth explaining the committee process. Again, this goes back to the earlier question that was raised about the document that was raised about targeted group. We spent about 2 million or so in terms of the targeted group, which is black people and women, youth with disability, and township-based enterprises. Again, it is here where we think we need to do more and improve this area of work. Similar to page 7, the procurement target for people with disability, particularly 7%, we should explain what is the total of that. We are improving our monitoring capacity in ensuring that we monitor progress and evaluate this program, particularly of people with disability. Yes, we have a unit in the Office of the Premier, but one thing we have not been able to do, including with a similar to the system on gender-based gender-responsive budgeting. We want to introduce a tool similar to that so that we can be in a position to measure where employed to profile, measure, and also be in a position to profile and also know exactly as we are supporting people with disability, who exactly we are supporting, and we can be able to be more comprehensive in relation to meeting the target of the 7%. And that's why in slide 16, we then indicate that when we're using the 2011 census, even that as well does require a lot of review. There's been a number of changes in the recent past. And just in Gauteng alone, we do indicate that Gauteng has a rate of about 5.3% in terms of the people with disability. And of course, we try to indicate using the 2011 census as to where and who, in terms of female and male, including in the districts, as to which ones, which district has a number of people with disability, so that when we do spatial referencing, we can be in a position to show where we are taking our money. And of course, noting that we are 5.3% of persons are in Gauteng, there is a need for us to then make sure that we create facilities and special care homes. We have, frail care centers like the Zanelembege and many others, but also we have to work with the sector to make sure that we are investing in the right places so that the notion of nothing for us without us is realized. And that's why even going forward, we're going to do an analysis in terms of the obstacles that are making it impossible for us to make the necessary intervention of achieving the 7% procurement spend in this regard. And one of the things, therefore, we're going to take steps to make sure that at least 7% of all public and private procurement bids under data are allocated to businesses and entities with people with disability. And that will mean, first and foremost, correcting the baseline. And that baseline is that of going beyond the 2011 census, so that you find that by using 7% as a target, but we find that the population is more than 5.3%. So those are some of the things we will do. The art departments that we indicate that have been doing well, particularly when you look at Gauteng, Department of Sports and Recreation spend about 7-8%, I think. But also, I think Department of Social Development as well has also been able to respond with regards to this issue and support of disability. Lastly, an analysis of the reasons why the procurement spend business with was not 7%. As I said earlier, this target has revealed that Black business owners with disability have had endless exclusion from education skills. So that's why earlier we said it is important that in addition to using the data for 2011, we need more analysis so that we can respond appropriately. But thus far, the initial research work we have done does make these findings that even though about plus minus or so 5,000 companies are registered in our supplier central base, less than 3,000 of these meet the minimum company registration. So we need to not just register them, but also make sure that they provide them with the necessary support to ensure that they are compliant. Further to this, most of these companies have been registered in very broad areas of trading. That's why some might not be able to compete. So we need to really improve on this area of work going forward. Then question 8, you say there were reported 38 resignations from OP. The resignations reported were 36, not 38 as indicated. Of the 36 resignations, 20 were learners and interns. These categories of employees are placed at developmental programs, are still seeking fixed employment. Therefore, they are bound to exit at a high rate because they get opportunities of full-time employment. 4 resignations were off the contract employees who are still seeking stability. 12 permanent employees resigned within wherein 10 were due to promotions. Some were moved to national governments, presidency, and so forth and so on during the period under review. P, we need to respond on the history. We have done that report, part of the 2 slides that they have been able to indicate earlier on. Chair, I think that is the part on the response to the questions. I don't know if my colleagues can report and respond, as I said, with regards to the issues of fraud detection and so forth. DDG Mashiane can respond to that. Even on Tirisano, but the rest is okay. We can hand back to the Premier. Is DDG Mashiane here? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. If she's not here, it's fine. Firstly, with regard to the open tender system, yes, we have been working on this issue, and as I said earlier, Premier Sufi has instructed that there are certain things we need to deal with, particularly as coming out of the last Stakeholder, and those issues relate to issues of improving fraud reviews. And the integrity, the state of integrity report did highlight certain actions. We are doing a matrix that we'll have to send to Premier, final approval, and that will also be something we're doing, also working with the Gauteng Ethics Advisory Committee. But as I said, Premier insisted that one of the critical things we must do just over this period, as part of dealing with issues of fraud detection, but also prevention, is to deal with challenges in SCM of the people that might be there and are not assisting. So using the normal and proper legislation, what to deal with those challenges in those areas. And then with regards to the failures of the PCCC, Premier will correct me. In the first instance, the Executive Council is the one that takes decisions on such issues through the member of an Executive Council. The Provincial Command Council was coordinating and pulling everybody together so that we work in a manner that, but decisions in terms of the law are taken differently. So I wouldn't venture into that myself, but also we continue to monitor and deal with these issues of Ntirisano commitments as they arise, so that we're in a position to respond to those issues. Premier's intervention on infrastructure is such that we can't just say we've got infrastructure across this province and it's not being improved or utilized, because if we invest in infrastructure, we're likely to change spatially and socially for places. And so the emphasis on elevating this priority, among others, is to use infrastructure to deal with the challenges that we have in the country, but also building efficient and proper infrastructure in the province. So that's how we understand the task, and that's how we're going to work on this task, but also ensure that we avoid any corruption, any other issue, learning from the experiences that we have had. So with that, Chair, thank you very much. Hand over to the Premier.
Honorable Premier, your closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. I truly appreciate it. I felt because I'm new, I didn't even want to respond to other issues that have been raised here because we're dealing with legacy matters. Safe to say that we have finalized our areas of interest, which we will share with you. The acting DG tried the opening of the presentation to share with you the areas that we want to focus on. We have indicated, Chair, that we'll continue with the growing Gauteng vision 2030, but we'll have 3 areas that we want to elevate. The first one being growing the economy of our province. Unfortunately, COVID devastated many economic opportunities, or destroyed many economic opportunities in our province. And our immediate interest is to really ensure that we recover from that and reposition the economy of our province to be the center of attraction of investors, whatever opportunities that we have. We have dropped to a 3rd place in terms of preferred investment destiny or destination, with Western Cape being number 1, followed by KZN, and now at number 3. And we used to occupy that position. So our hope
We lost you, Premier. We lost you, Premier.
I'm really sorry. I think connectivity. Yeah, my connectivity is it's a challenge. Apologies. Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes, I can hear you, Premier. Can continue.
Can you hear me, Chair? Yes, we said that we used to be the preferred province in terms of investment. We've dropped from number 1 to number 3, with Western Cape being number 1, number 2 being KZN. And we are at number 3. It's a matter that we want to improve and improve urgently, and so we've elevated that part. The second part, we have taken the challenge or the fight against crime as a priority of this administration. We honestly want to leave no stone unturned, move resources across, because if we can't protect our citizens, if we can't protect businesses, and if we can't protect our infrastructure, we don't deserve to be called government. And you will see that amongst our highest or area of priority that we have elevated high is the fight against crime, corruption, lawlessness, and vandalism. We've deliberately brought the element of vandalism because there are problems where people either they remove cables or manholes, or they just destroy property that belongs to the state when they protest and other things. So we are putting a high-level crime prevention strategy that involves an element of e-security as a key area that we want to bring and elevate. The second element is human capacity. And the third element is the infrastructure component of it to support the fight against crime. In terms of e-security, we've already made announcements that we want to bring or ensure that every inch of Gauteng is covered with high caliber HD motion sensor CCTVs that can convey the footage into an integrated communication command center. And then secondly, we want to use the power of drones, and we are also acquiring high caliber helicopters through our Department of Community Safety. You will see when we publish our budget adjustment, the budget of the Department of Community Safety is going to see a massive increase in terms of their budget and their capacity. So that's the element of e-security that we honestly feel we need to put up, including the introduction of what we call e-panic buttons, so that each and every community or member that feel threatened by any form of crime, they can press that e-panic button. In terms of human resource, we are in the process of recruiting 6,000 new young, fit people to assist us to be the first frontline team to fight crime while we're still waiting for the police, for local traffic cops to join in the fight. We are strengthening the Department of Community Safety with 6,000 people that are not going to be in the offices, but are going to patrol each and every ward, and we are acquiring tools of trade for them so that they can do their work. I think the department has already prematurely issued an advertisement of recruitment. We want that advertisement to be withdrawn because we're still working on their tools of trade and many other things, the nature of training, because this is the unit that will also be unleashed to stop land invasion and lawlessness, where people that have just built infrastructure without permission from municipalities. We want to remove those infrastructure, those kind of structures. So they need to be properly trained. So we can't just recruit whoever that feels that they're unemployed and they want to be part of this. So that's the human capacity that we want to. The infrastructure part, we are quite aware that we've already moved to recoup the SANRAL infrastructure. We have the view that if you have to fight crime, there are three areas that we need to improve. One is motor vehicles. Majority of, especially our violent crimes, involves motor vehicles. So we want to change the number plate, the registration plates, and the manner in cars are registered in our province. We've already commissioned CSIR to introduce a new number plate registration that can be read by our cameras, that can be linked to our integrated command center, so that we can know the owner. We can also know if that car is stolen and is registered in our province, and many other things. The second thing that contributes to crime is weapons, guns, and majority of them are unregistered. Another thing, a putting mechanism to ensure that those that are registered, we can be in a position to account and track them and be in a position to retrieve them if they are lost. Thirdly is the issue of alcohol and drugs that contribute to crime. And we are putting mechanism to manage either the registration or no registration of new liquor licenses, and the enforcement of the current liquor licenses, and the cancellation of liquor licenses that don't comply, together with the closure of areas that sell drugs, especially dacha, and we are also rehabilitating young people that are involved.
We lost you again, Premier. Premier, are you done? We lost you. No, we have lost the Premier. Honorable members, I think we should move on. I would like to propose, members, that we withdraw the next item because it will need a lot of work, more especially after the inputs that were done by you members on the bill. We must rework our program for the public hearings. So I would ask the team to
I'm sorry, I think my connectivity is a problem.
Yeah, it's very bad, Premier. So I want to suggest that we withdraw that item, members, so that we are then able to read the team to rework on it, given your suggestions and your input and the time that we need for to process this bill. Therefore, we cannot rush. I think we all agree on that one. The next item is the next item. Then would be what will be resolution tracking. Do we have any?
It will be done in the next coming meetings, Chair.
Oh,
Thank
okay,
you.
okay, perfect. No correspondence. The date of the next meeting, members, it's at 2. That's why I'm rushing to close this meeting now, so that you are able to have at least a break of about 40 minutes to prepare for the next meeting at 2, where the legislature is coming to make their to present their report. Sorry, Premier, about the disconnectivity, but DG, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the presentations, and thank you, members, for your participation. And the meeting then stands adjourned up until we meet at 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Yes.